Good morning, and welcome to the League of Women Voters First Friday. My name is Diane Proctor, and I'm the chair of the Town Government Committee, and this is our third First Friday of the year. We are privileged this morning to welcome the people who have been responsible for and working so hard on the new middle school building project in the town of Concord. I don't open my email, but that I see there's another meeting. There's another meeting. There's another meeting. So I suspect these people have been living on Zoom or living in small rooms, masked together and solving the various conundrums of the building process. And we also have Christine Reynolds, who is the chair of the FinCom, another committee in our town, which works very hard to help us keep track of what the costs of our town are and to keep citizens aware of what those costs will be now and going forward. The people who are here to speak for the school committee are Pat Nelson, Don Guariello, Laurie Hunter, who we all know as the superintendent of schools, Matt Rice from SMMA, and Ian Parks from Hill International. Of course, there's Heather Bout, who has also been helping to spearhead all of this. And Heather, a warm welcome and a thank you for corralling all of us so that this could be a successful event.
Thank you for making it happen.
I also want to thank in the background, Carlin Reed, who is, we can't see right now, but Carlin is back there monitoring the chat box. So here's how we'll proceed. 30 minutes of presentation on the challenges that the school committee, building committee has faced and how they've met those challenges. What were the strategies they used? Then after exactly 30 minutes, we will turn to Christine, who will present the understandings that the FinCom has arrived at, I don't want to end that sentence in a preposition, at which the FinCom has arrived, and to share with us her sensibilities about what the long range and short range costs will be to towns and citizens. And then we'll have a nice open mic period for questions to one or other of the many speakers who are joining us this morning. So welcome everyone. And I will now go silent, and Carlin will be monitoring the chat box. So if you have questions, please put your questions in the chat box, because sometimes they kind of pop up as you listen to someone speak. So pop them into the chat box, and between that and raising your hand, we welcome a vigorous and open discourse. Thank you.
So I'm happy to kick us off, and then I'm going to turn it to Dawn for a welcome. And then I think, Pat, you're taking it from there. Yep. I'm always happy to be on a first Friday with the league and the membership that joins us. And we've had many rich conversations over the years and adapted now to do this on Zoom. And hopefully we'll be back in person at some day. I'm on Zoom too much considering I have buildings full of people. So I'm eager to have that happen as well. It's a really exciting point in the project. I feel like we're hitting the mark where a lot of conceptual work and a lot of planning and a lot of hope starts to feel tangible. I actually, on another topic, was talking with a retired middle school teacher of many years retired the other day, and she could not help but loop me to this project and the energy and enthusiasm of what her current day colleagues are going to have for opportunity should this be successful, that even all those years ago as a middle school teacher, she even envisioned what, if the building wasn't so limiting, what the options could be. So it was really fun to hear a veteran retired educator who had a career worth of time in the middle school see the potential that this is going to offer us for educational opportunities for kids. So we're really excited to share more today. This is an interesting choice of topics you've asked of us, of what the challenges have been. Just like any project, it's got its ups and downs, and then we did it in the middle of a pandemic just to make it more interesting. So Pat will take that on, and we're happy to all contribute as we talk on how we've navigated the kind of behind the curtain conversation. So thanks for having us. Dawn, I'm going to let you say a few words and pass it off to Pat.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Hunter. Hello, everyone. I'm Don Guariello. I live on Brewster's Hill Road here in Concord. I've been here just over 4 years. My husband, Greg, is actually on Christine's committee. He's on Concord's finance committee. And we both love living in Concord. We have 2 young kids that go to Alcott. I have a 1st and 3rd grader and look forward to them benefiting hopefully from this project. But when I moved to town, I caught wind that there was a school project, and all of my career I've been designing public schools in Massachusetts. So of course my ears perked up, and I became quite interested and showed up to a couple school committee meetings, and the rest is history, I guess, as they say. But I'm thrilled to be part of this project. Yes, definitely had its challenges, its ups and downs. I'm used to that. Every project goes through it. I'm thankful for the committee that we have. Everyone is very thorough and engaged. And I think we've come a long way despite the pandemic, as Dr. Hunter mentioned, that basically hit in the middle of our feasibility and schematic design phases. But I think where we are is exciting given the climate that we're in. I think the design is reflective of where the education in Concord is looking to go. The educational plan that Dr. Hunter and her team put together is thoughtful and forward-thinking, and look forward to the architecture supporting that. So all of those things, I could talk forever, but I won't because we only have 30 minutes. So I want to turn it over to my co-chair, Pat. Pat's been wonderful. She jumped in the middle of the pandemic when we had a change in leadership, and I'm so thankful for her partnership and the leadership on this group. So Pat, we're here.
Thank you.
Want to take it away? We're here to answer questions and participate. But so thank you, everyone.
I'll take it away. Thank you. I'm also very glad to be here. Just to give you a little context, I've been in Concord since 1989. One of the first things I did was start going to League of Women Voters meetings, and then with kids and full-time work, it slacked off, but I'm looking forward to when I retire, coming back and joining the fold. And I've really appreciated these opportunities to speak to the League. I remember before the pandemic hit, you had I think it must have been a First Friday in the basement of the West Concord Union Church. And that's when I heard Lori present the educational plan and the vision for the project. And it was just so thrilling to me. Both my children went through the middle school. They were both at Sanborn. They both danced on the Sanborn floor that had in its own little wavy pattern to it. It's certainly been a long time coming to do this. So I'll try to get to the point of the challenges, but I want to just sort of start at a high level with how we responded to all of the challenges. I think the overall response, which I think is very key to the success of this project, is that we had a really sound educational plan that we could continually go back to and say, does this decision or this problem, how we resolve it, will it align to support the educational vision and the plan? And that's really been key. I work in nonprofit, and whenever we make a decision, we look back at our mission statement, and I feel that the educational plan and the vision that Dr. Hunter and her staff pulled together has been the keystone to our success, because we can keep going back to it no matter what's thrown at us. And a lot was thrown at us this year. Lori mentioned the pandemic. We were on a hiatus for several months. The public schools were in, I can only imagine the adjustments and the work that Lori and her staff had to do at that particular moment to adjust to the pandemic, as well as all of the town committees and all of the town people that one interacts with when doing something like this kind of a building project. But people adjusted to that and responded to that. And again, one of the responses has been Zoom. We pulled ourselves back together, started meeting regularly in December of 2020. We've been on Zoom steadfastly. And I think one of the benefits of Zoom has been that we've been able to meet so frequently to catch up. We've also been able to get our professionals in the Zoom room with us on a regular basis, probably more than we ever would have in terms of having meetings and ironing out problems and having conversations. Although I prefer face-to-face and I want to be in the same room with other human beings, I recognize that this, the technology enabled us to have many more fruitful conversations and many more problem-solving sessions where we were all in the same room talking to each other. So I was just thinking about some of the highlights, and then, I want to let Dawn or Ian or Matt or Lori talk about challenges that have more to do with the actual building of the building or creating of the building. But I wanted to kind of talk about the process of coming to where we are today, running this committee and making it work so that we have a product for the town to vote on in January. Probably the biggest challenge was reconciling the budget with the vision. So we knew that we had a budget. We knew that we had a charge from the town. We also were coming out of a pandemic where building costs and everything had changed. But again, we wanted to build a building that aligned with the educational plan and the vision. And because that was so clear, we could take each piece of the building and its costs and its opportunities and its challenges and weigh it against the plan and the vision to make our decisions. So in those decisions and discussions, this wasn't a committee that was making tacit agreement. It wasn't a quiet committee that nodded yes to the professionals and to the educators. That was sometimes wonderful and sometimes challenging, as every committee is. But I think in the end, it really forced us to come up with a very good product that has great efficiencies in it and aligns with what the town wants for a budget. But there were some of the big challenges that you know about is as we started the process, and there's a community aspect to this building. And from the get-go, from the approval of the feasibility study, there was a desire for this new school to have community spaces for it. When we started to feed into the design process, the community spaces, that was going to change the budget and the cost structure. So we really had to think very hard about what we were going to do with those requests from the town. And specifically, that was the auditorium and the gymnasium. And so the way we responded to that was to listen to an awful lot of people, to go out and talk to an awful lot of people, to meet with the basketball folks, to meet with the parents and the music and drama people, to meet with the finance committee, to meet with the select board, to really try to pull together a lot of the voices in town that have maybe some competing interests. And then how could we as a committee work to meet those interests in either a compromise or simply to understand that we couldn't. But we spent a lot of time in conversation about it. And it was a deep dive into the design and a deep dive into the desires of the committee. The great thing was that we were able to also talk to the educators, and Lori and Justin and their staffs were very involved in these discussions so that we could, as a committee, understand what the school needed from these spaces. So what would make these spaces excellent and optimal spaces, and what desires of the community also supported the educational plan. And through all of that kind of back and forth, and there was a lot of it, I think we came up with a very good solution for the size of the auditorium and the size of the gym that will meet the needs of the community as well as the school, and helped us stay within our budget. The other thing that I sort of alluded to is that it was not a quiet committee. It was a committee that had strong opinions. It was a committee that had a great deal of interest in delving into the details and getting into the weeds. We had a superb staff of professionals working for us, but the committee wasn't hesitant about pushing the professionals. And that makes it a little bit more work to manage, but I think we were able to manage it pretty darn well. And again, that was through a lot of conversations, a lot of meetings, and making sure that we were getting the information that we needed from the professionals, asking a lot of questions, making sure that the subcommittees were listened to, and responding to their questions. And everybody wasn't always happy about it. Everybody didn't like the answers that they always got. But I think that we were able to kind of agree to disagree at some points and work our way through some of those challenges. And that's the process that made this committee work, and it's going to make this project so successful as we go forward. That also, all that communication, even though we were on Zoom, I think over the, I don't know, it feels like 10 years that we've been meeting, but I guess it's been about 2 years that we've been sort of knowing each other, that I think a lot of trust has been established. And I don't think any committee in town can work without trust between its members. And that was sometimes hard-won trust, but I think that we've been able to build that, and to always go back to what the vision and the goals are for this middle school for children and students. Working with the school committee as they went through approving the ed plan and having their support on the ed plan was hugely important. Working with even going to finance committee meetings and to select board meetings and hearing people say, this sounds like a really good plan. This sounds like something that's going to be good for the children. We believe that you know what you're doing. That was enormously helpful for us to keep working through. It was just a lot of communication. We now have another challenge that I think we've just kind of gone through. We've been doing the value engineering, or I'm sorry, value management. We don't call it value engineering anymore. We try to look at it in a more strengths-based way. There were some hard decisions to be made, and we got through that. And I think we're at a really good place with that. But again, that was a lot of discussion and a lot of data and a lot of information and a lot of facts. I guess that's the other thing is I feel like we really stuck to what are the facts? What's the data? What's the science that drives the building costs that will support the educational plan and vision? And those were very helpful. The last thing that's going to be a challenge for us is where we're going to put all the dirt. And that is an interesting thing I'd never even thought of when building a building. We are going to be generating a lot of dirt, and how we manage that dirt in town can save us a whole lot of money. So having the collaboration of the town and the close relationships with the town, with Marcia Rasmussen and with Elizabeth and with Stephen, and working to see what are the creative solutions we can have for something that doesn't feel like part of the educational plan or the vision, but is an expense and is going to be an important thing that we want to solve as efficiently as possible. So those were the kind of highlights that came to my mind as I was thinking about the challenges of making this project work. There are probably other more concrete challenges, how to deal with the ravine that goes down the middle of the site, how the architects designed to deal with that, how Lori was able to get an educational plan pulled together while educators were all in the midst of a COVID crisis. So I'm going to turn it over to Lori and Ian and Matt and Dawn if you want to add anything from that perspective.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to talk on a couple of aspects of challenge before we turn it to the professionals. I think one is being the educational leaders, Justin Cameron and I, him as principal and me as superintendent. One of our biggest tasks was translating and communicating the building committee's work with the staff and making sure that line of communication was open. Our professional team certainly talked with the staff directly a number of times, but as the process has evolved, that has been one of our great focus areas, is making sure the staff feels informed. And there are challenges there. The staff did not get everything they have asked for. And we have had to talk a lot with them about the whys of that and how it's going to go forward, and make sure that they see the glass half full, which they completely do. It's just in the moment as they're being asked what they want, and not everybody gets everything they want. We have to, really just support them in how that's going to look and feel, and the wish list gets trimmed down, of course. I think adding to that, an unforeseen challenge that impacted everything, both the ed plan and the cost and the design itself. We have 2 schools online right now, which is an enormous negative a lot of the time. The piece I never appreciated till the project started was we have a lot of space. The square footage of those 2 schools is quite significant. And we are usually, seeing that. We never notice that part because the facilities are so inadequate, but we have a lot of room. We just don't have good room, but we have a lot of it. So this project turned into a consolidation of 2 buildings into smaller and less square footage than we currently have. I did not somehow see the challenges that was going to bring, in that we're now pretty able to spread out and only have space issues usually at Sanborn, because we chose to put 7th and 8th grade both in there together, knowing it would be tight. But a very different task to consolidate the 2 schools into one, to talk on how that reduction was going to impact us. And I think we navigated it successfully with a lot of discussion and a lot of planning, and a lot of talk with the design team, who huge shout out. There were times they got posed a challenge to solve that I didn't think they'd have a good answer to. And it came back with this miraculous new way to look at it. And we would come out still getting what we were hoping for within a more space efficient design. So I can't even imagine the countless hours some of those answers took behind the scenes. So those, I think, on the education side, the vision itself was not the challenge. We were well into trying to execute whatever version of the vision we could, even in the current schools. But translating it to what it would look like in a new school has been a lot of fun, and yes, challenging at points, to really identify what that's going to look and feel like, and sure, compromise on a few of the pieces of the vision that we had, and try to be sure that we're, complementing the town's fiscal abilities, and knowing it's such an extensive project and such a big commitment, especially, let's name it, without MSBA and the challenge, and even making that decision. If we go back to the beginning of the challenges, that alone was an enormous process and challenge to decide that we couldn't wait for that to happen, suspecting it never was going to. So it's been a real team effort, so many different groups all coming together to make it a positive, successful story. But to Pat's point, that's taken a lot of trust and communication, and being able to handle disagreement in a respectful environment, and come out with a solution that could be, supported by everyone. So,
Lori, if I can build on your MSBA, that was going to be my one challenge
yeah.
for me as a professional in the field. 95% of my projects follow the MSBA model, which, if you don't know, it's the Massachusetts State Building Authority. They, if you're accepted into their grant program, they reimburse a certain amount of dollars back to your project, and they try to spread the dollars across the Commonwealth, which is part of the reason we, had received money from them for the high school recently. It takes a while to get back in their queue and to be accepted again. So long story short, not following that, not having them as the umbrella of the yes and no, and having to sort of navigate our way through. In some ways, it's liberating. We're not tied to their, their guidelines per se, but we held ourselves to a high standard, saying what would the state allow, or what is the norm, and constantly going back to what they might have said had we been in their program. For me, it was both challenging and liberating. So it's been nice to not have to be so defined by their process, but to, follow the guidelines along the way as we make our decisions. So for me, that's been one place that has been challenging and rewarding. So I don't know if the design professionals want to share anything. I'm not sure where we are, Diane, with our time. I want to be respectful of that.
23 minutes and 17 seconds so far. You have 7 minutes.
Excellent. Good. So if folks don't know, Matt Rice is with SMMA. There are designers, there are architects, the professionals that we've hired to design the building. Ian Parks is with Hill International, and they're our owner's project manager, and are contracted with us to represent us as a client in this process. So if you gentlemen have challenges you'd like to share, anything, feel free to take the floor.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in here, Don. Thank you. And I think I'll talk about one item that Pat actually touched on, which was the ravine, as she referred to it. And of course, I'm the architect, so I'm going to need to lead on some visuals. I love visuals. So if you give me a second, I'll just share my screen here.
And fun fact, Matt and I went to college together. Complete coincidence, by the way, but we both went to RPI around the same time. So I know Matt and his wife, who also is an architect from RPI.
He is, yes. And so the ravine that Pat referred to is set here. Hopefully everyone can see my sketches that are down to the forest there towards the bottom of the screen.
We can see it, Matt.
A little bit sort of beyond sort of the ravine itself is really the issue of siting the building on this particular location. And there are a lot of constraints that came into place, and constraints and challenges. I think the best way of dealing with them is when you can take a challenge and actually flip it and turn it into an opportunity. And I think that's really what we've done here in a lot of ways. The biggest constraint building on this site is really having the ability to maintain the existing Sanborn site in operation while we're building a new building. Because of course, there's no place else in town to relocate those students. So this dashed line that you can see here is the Sanborn building. That's the footprint that we need to maintain existing. So once we say that, we have actually a very limited area in terms of building a building of this size for the new middle school. The other key constraint that we had here is really solar orientation. And I know Dawn mentioned this the other evening at our community forum. But really it's ideal to orient a building in this particular configuration, east to west in terms of the building, so that the north and south elevations of the building have the most controllable daylight, the most access to the best daylight coming into those spaces. And so that's really a primary design consideration that we have here. So when we have a long building like that, we're keeping the existing Sanborn in play, we actually get very limited in terms of where we can position the building. And it actually ended up pushing in this direction towards the south. And anyone that knows the existing middle school site knows that there is a heavily wooded area that's towards the south and as well towards the eastern side of the site. And within that wooded area, there's actually a very steep grade that drops off. So there's a hill that drops down to the field, as well as to the Minuteman path that runs through there. Or not the Minuteman, but sorry, the bike path. That's my bike path that I'm familiar with. So as we push the building towards the edge of the hillside there, we end up dealing with a lot of topography. And so rather than trying to fight it, what we ended up doing is really creating an opportunity to bring that natural woodland into the design of the building. It was one of the key goals of the education plan, actually, to make those indoor-outdoor connections. And there's an existing natural ravine, sort of a gully that runs through that hill that we've actually opened up through the building and allowed the building to connect through. It really adds to the experience of the building upon entering through the main entrance. And if you give me a second, I can bring up a three-dimensional perspective that gives you a sense of what that looks and feels like. So the building itself is set down into topography. And here, as we enter on the right-hand side of the screen here, this is the main entrance. There's a natural amphitheater that we're really forming out of that ravine and amplifying it. It creates a connection through to some outdoor classrooms that are behind and below the academic wing that's off to the left-hand side. But really this very welcoming, sort of naturally connected sense of entry. So again, taking the challenge that existed with the ravine and turning it into an opportunity.
Thanks,
I'll
Matt.
stop sharing there.
Yeah, Ian, you want to say a few words, but before I turn it in, I just wanted to say I love that opportunity you took. That ravine is it's efficient. It's not adding. It's a good solution. It's not a Taj Mahal solution, and it's creating an environment that I think is so healthy for middle school age kids. And I won't get started on that. So, Ian, you want to say something?
Sure. Yeah, no, thank you. So
You have about a minute.
Sorry, Ian.
No problem. As the owner's project manager, you know, we strive to help you guys manage cost, schedule, and quality, right? We talked about the three legs of the stool since the beginning of the project, and it's always a balancing act with every project, and there's always challenges that come along with it. And I think that we've been able to work through those over time. I think one of the things that stands out that was, you know, kind of switching gears and figuring out how to maintain schedule and cost was the community interest in the larger gym and adding an auditorium. You know, we were transitioning from the feasibility phase into schematic design, and that interest, you know, increased, and we started having more and more discussions about, do we add an auditorium? Do we increase the size of gym? And what would that look like? And so, you know, the way that we attacked that was we met with the stakeholders. What the needs were. We understood what the program, what the programming desires were there. Same with the school staff, you know, what's going to be the use of these spaces throughout the day, throughout the school day, after school programs, that sort of thing. And really taking those desires and programming needs and putting in front of the architect and saying, okay, how do we accommodate this? What do the spaces need to look like at the end of the day? And working through that with the subcommittees, with the design subcommittee, and bubbling it up to the greater committee, and really talking through the importance of those spaces and what they look like, while trying to switch gears and, you know, maintain schedule and maintain cost, because it was a lot to absorb from a schedule and cost perspective, and there were trade-offs and that were made along the way, and we were able to maintain schedule throughout, which was a great feat, with everybody collaborating together and really focusing on that particular effort and driving through it. So.
Thank you. I'm sorry for the limited amount of time, but we appreciate it, and there'll be lots of time for questions. Before we turn to Christine, I just want us to clarify two things. There will be a public hearing for citizens on December 16th at 7 o'clock in the evening. This will be a hybrid meeting, which means that it will take place in the townhouse, but also on Zoom. So depending on, what your abilities are or your preference for the, apparently they're able to do both, and that's pretty exciting. Also, could you give us an example? One of the reasons we didn't ask you to go through the whole schema is that you presented several opportunities for the citizens of Concord to come and hear about the details in the plan. When is the next one such opportunity?
I am happy to jump in with that answer, if that's helpful. Did you want to hear that now, Diane?
Yes, please.
Okay, great. So we have several things coming up still. We will continue to have events throughout town meeting. The next one I think will be really fun is next week, Wednesday evening, December 8th. We're having a panel discussion on sustainability in the new building. So this is obviously a topic that is near and dear to many in town. We're actually doing it in person, which will be really fun. Masks will be required, but we're having it at the Peabody building of the middle school. We're going to have a panel of 3 experts. It will be Matt Root, who is the chair of our sustainability subcommittee on the building committee. Martine Dion from SMMA, from the design firm. She's the director of sustainable design there. And then Jake Swenson, who's the chair of CAAB, Concord's Climate Action Advisory Board. So, and Dawn will be moderating, since she has the architectural expertise, and she'll be posing questions to each of the panelists, which they will answer from their own expertise, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. So that, I think, should be really fun and interesting. If you're interested in sustainability, please come join us. Again, it's at the Peabody building, 7 p.m. Wednesday night, the 8th. And then following that, we will continue to have a bunch of coffees and casual events. So we'll continue to promote those dates. I don't have them all off the top of my head, but we've been doing basically at least 2 or 3 events per week over the last 5 weeks, and we'll continue through January 20th. Some of them are large community forums. Some of them are small coffees. Some people would prefer to come to a small event with 3 or 4 people and be able to just have a conversation. So several have been like that. We've held them at the schools. We've reached out to, the Council on Aging. We're going to be there actually the first week, next week, I think.
Yeah.
And on Thursday, I think. Sorry, I don't have the dates. I'll get it out to you. So we're going to be lots of different places. And I would say even that when we're talking challenges from the beginning of this, I saw this in terms of community engagement as one of our biggest challenges. Coming off the high school project, there was concern and suspicion in town. There were some bad feelings about how that process went. I came in at the end, was not involved a minute, but came in and really saw the frustrations at the end and knew that transparency and community engagement was going to be critical to this project. So from the very beginning, that's been my biggest goal. And my biggest challenge, because it's hard to get things out enough to really let people feel engaged, but that's what we're trying to do.
Thank you so much, Heather. And you referenced January 20th for a reason. Can you tell us?
Yes, yes, absolutely. January 20th is the special town meeting. It is a special town meeting with just one question, so it shouldn't be a long night like some of them are. For anyone out there interested, there will be free childcare. It's at the high school. Although it is indoors, we're going to have people as spread out as possible and use multiple spaces. Obviously, masks will be required. So that's January 20th for the special town meeting. And then there will also be a follow-up ballot vote on February 3rd. So we'll need everybody to come vote twice, if you don't mind. At town meeting, the warrant would need to be approved by a 2/3 vote. And then the follow-up vote at the ballot will need to just be a majority in order to pass. And that would allow the town to proceed with the lending to fund the building.
Thank you very, very much, Heather. And thank you for the presenters. And now I would like to introduce Christine Rose. We all know Christine. She's the chair of the Finance Committee. Christine is going to talk to us as citizens on kind of, so what are the implications of this? What does it mean financially, both to the individual and to the town? Thank you, Christine.
You're welcome. Good morning, everybody. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen here. Let's see. Okay, everybody can see that? Good.
Yes, we can see
Okay.
it. Well done.
Terrific. All right, so let's talk about the financial implications. Where I thought I would start was just to sort of ground us in a data point or a point in time for some of the information I'm going to share with you. So I took data as of the end of fiscal 21, which is June 30th. And you'll see some of the things here, right? So what is the median property value in the town? And that's, you can see, around 900,000. Associated with that is what is the median property tax bill? And you'll see as we go through the numbers how that is used. That's often a benchmark for how the FinCom thinks about increases to the tax bill. So that's why that's important. I wanted to also make sure you're aware that we do have a debt stabilization fund of about 2 million that was established just about 2 years ago in anticipation of the middle school. In terms of debt that the town already has, I have an amount here, the 57 million is related to what's owed by the town, but it's for excluded debt. So the concept of excluded debt goes back to Proposition 2.5. So you can increase the tax levy up to 2.5%. And if you need to go beyond that, which is often the case when you have a large building and you need to, you have to go to the taxpayers and get a vote. And that's the items that Heather just mentioned. So we have a number of pieces of excluded debt. This total here relates to the excluded debt that the town has that is not related to the enterprise fund. So not related to water and sewer or the light plant. So this is related to the schools. So this is debt that's owed on the existing elementary schools, the regional high school, and Minuteman Regional Tech. So that's what that 57 million represents. And if you compared that to sort of the total debt in the town, that's around 75 million. So most of the debt is tied to the school buildings. And most of it is excluded debt, meaning the town had to vote to approve it. And it is beyond what would be allowed under Proposition 2.5. Associated with that 57 million is an annual debt service. So debt service is principal and interest that the town pays. And it for fiscal year 21, the debt service that was paid on that 57 million is $7 million. So that's the principal and interest that we paid in that year. Another important piece of data is our bond rating. So Concord has a long history of having the highest bond rating, which is AAA. Our rating agency is Moody's, and we had a debt offering in May of 2021. And so that is our latest bond rating there with AAA. All right, moving on. So now we're going to talk about the middle school. So I made some assumptions here to walk you through the amount. So my assumption is that the building will cost approximately 100 million. The debt will be paid over a 20-year period. The interest rate will be 4%. That will result in an annual debt service, meaning an annual charge for principal and interest of 7.4 million. So that's in addition to the 7 million that was on the page before. So it essentially doubles debt service. If you looked at it from the total perspective, the principal and interest that would be paid over the debt term, it's about 154 million. So 100 million is the cost of the building, but because we borrow the funds to pay for it, and again, this depends. So this is the calculation that depends on the term of the debt, that 20 years that I have assumed here, and the interest rate. You won't know the interest rate until the town floats the debt, which won't be until FY25. So this is an assumption based on the town's financial advisor. So the town has an outside group that helps the town approach the debt market when we go to float bonds. And their advice has been to use 4%. For a context here, This is our largest borrowing to date. So even though we recently did the high school, just to understand the difference, the high school building cost was about 92 million. We shared that with Carlisle, so about 70% of that was borne by Concord. But because there was an MSBA grant on that project, the actual amount of our obligation was 47 million. So that 47 million would compare to the 100 million with respect to the middle school. So that's why it is our largest borrowing. So if you take all of that, you say, well, what does it do? So it would increase our excluded debt outstanding by about 100 million. As I mentioned, it would add to our annual debt service, the payment of principal and interest, by 7.4 million. So that's what you would actually be paying every year. And then in terms of how that impacts that median property tax bill. So on my first slide, I showed you a number about 13,000. I took that number and I sort of incrementally added 2.5% per year from FY21 up to FY25. And that brings me to a median property tax bill of somewhere around 14,000. So the cost of the 7.4 million in debt service translates into about $1,000 on that median property tax bill. And that itself, so this is the marginal impact. This is not included any other changes in that particular year. So I'm simply looking at what's the impact of adding 7.4 million in debt service to the median tax bill. So it would be about $1,000, or on its own, 7% increase. Now that's without any impact from debt stabilization. So I mentioned that there's 2 million existing in debt stabilization, and there also could be some other offsets. So back in September, the select board brought together a bunch of folks around town to help think about what ways the middle school costs could be brought down, either through cost ideas or revenue offsets. So other options that could be brought to pay for it beyond that of property tax. So those, there were about 15 ideas that came out of that. They ranged in size. There's about $500,000 that's projected in savings from the consolidation of the 2 middle schools. So there is some savings from bringing 2 buildings into 1. So there's some savings there. There's also discussion about using the Peabody land once the new school is open. Could that land be sold or somehow developed? There were ideas around naming rights. So a series of ideas that folks are working on to see if there are other ways besides tax dollars to pay for this. So this number does not reflect any of that. It's simply the pure impact of the additional debt service on the tax bill. Another way to look at that, the growth in the tax bill. So just so we, again, getting back to what I'm really looking at here is the excluded debt service tied to the school debt, which is the primary excluded debt that we have in town outside of the enterprise funds. So you can see this schedule shows you from 09 to FY30, and on the left-hand side is the impact to the median tax bill. So in the blue at the bottom are the elementary schools, the green is the high school, the small purple there is the Minuteman debt, and then you see the middle school coming in 25, and you can see it's from that median tax bill, it has a significant impact. And in particular, there's a few peak years there. So 25, 26, and 27 are pretty peak years in terms of the increase to debt service and the hit on the tax bill. Okay. Debt stabilization. So I want to talk a little bit about this. So what are the tools that we can use to control the cost impact to the taxpayer? So the number one tool is to keep the cost lower. So the number one tool is to have a project that costs less. The number 2 tool could be moving it. So again, I'm thinking about the schedule I just showed you. How do we avoid that peak? Both those topics have been discussed, at length, and it doesn't appear that that's going to happen. So I think the cost is going to stay around 100 million. I think the project is going to happen when it's going to happen. It's going to happen in FY25. So another option is to soften the blow of that large increase in taxes by creating debt stabilization. So 2 years ago, the FinCom with the select board put on the town warrant a $2 million appropriation from free cash to establish a debt stabilization. So that's there. Most recently, the Board of Assessors voted to release $1 million of overlay surplus. So the Board of Assessors has an allowance each year, a reserve, if you will, to help them deal with any adjustments that come out of assessment challenges. So folks who come in and say the tax assessment is incorrect. So over time, that balance builds up. And in the past, the town has gone to the Board of Assessors and asked if they have excess funds in that reserve and if it could be used for other challenges in the town. And I know most recently, I think it was used to help with affordable housing. So the select board had that discussion with the Board of Assessors, and they voted to release $1 million of that surplus. And it will be on the warrant for annual town meeting. And we will ask the town if we can move that into the debt stabilization for the middle school. So that if that is approved, that would bring that stabilization fund to $3 million. So for purposes of this discussion, if we took that $3 million and we applied it in the peak debt years, 26, 27, and 28, it would reduce the impact on that median tax bill by $139. So instead of the $1,024, it would be $139 less than that. If there is more money in debt stabilization, so we have really until FY25 to keep building debt stabilization, the impact would increase, the benefit of it would increase. So you'd be able to reduce it further. So if you had, for instance, $5 million in debt stabilization, the amount that could be taken off the peak years approaches $232. So depending on how much you have set aside will drive the ability that you can soften the blow at the peak. And that's something that we're going to be pursuing, because as I mentioned, I think we know what the cost is going to be. I think we see what the impact is. It's quite substantial. And this is probably one of the best ways, in addition to, as I mentioned earlier, ideas that the community has with respect to other sources of funding to either offset or reduce the cost somehow. So the items that I mentioned earlier. Bond rating. So one of the other implications for the town is our bond rating. So as I mentioned, we have the top bond rating at AAA. This is an excerpt from the most recent Moody's report. So from a rationale as why we have the highest rating, you can see there, it's because of a healthy financial position supported by stable reserves and strong fiscal management. They also rely very heavily on the fact that we have an affluent tax base in Concord and well-managed pension and OPEB. OPEB is other post-employment benefits, which really relates to retiree health insurance costs and healthcare costs. So Concord is unique in that we have quite a bit of funding associated with that OPEB liability compared to many of the municipalities in Massachusetts. So that is one of the other reasons why we are at a AAA rating. In terms of the factors that could lead to a downgrade, they're highlighted at the bottom of that page. So decline in general fund reserves and liquidity. So what they're really speaking to there is what we would call free cash. So Concord has as a financial policy that we like to maintain free cash between 5 and 10% of the operating budget. So at the end of 21, we had about $8.5 million in free cash, which I think was around 7% or so in terms of that percentage of the operating budget. Every year we use some of it. So FinCom for the past couple of years has taken $1 million from free cash to reduce the tax burden. So we take $1 million of funds that are essentially surplus and apply it to the next year's tax rate. In the past 3 years, there's also been a recurring request from the affordable housing groups in town to appropriate about $500,000 from free cash. So there's sort of two items that seem to be a recurring draw on free cash. And there are other things that cause free cash to be drawn down. It could be it's really there as a rainy day fund, right? It's meant to provide some wiggle room, if you will, if you have a situation where your revenues are perhaps less than what you expected, which certainly we had during the pandemic. This was also the source of the original stabilization reserve for $2 million. So they're looking at that. They're looking to see what is the level of your reserve. So it's important for us to manage those. Obviously, if they saw that voters were not willing to support operating or capital needs, that would impact the rating agency's view of Concord's willingness and ability to pay, and a material increase in the debt burden, which certainly we're going to have. So adding $100 million in excluding debt in connection with the middle school will be a material increase in the debt burden. That does not mean we're definitely going to have any sort of a downgrade. It's just one of the factors that they will be considering, which is why that the reserves and some of the other things that are very positive in our rating, which has to do with the tax base's willingness to continue to vote to support these sort of projects. Those are all the things that Moody's will take into account. But I think those are some important factors there. The other question that I was asked was around, how would this building and the debt that we take on in connection with it affect the town's ability to do other things? And that's not an easy question to answer because it's a lot of different factors that go into it. So there's nothing that limits us from a debt perspective. So the state has some calculation that says how much debt a town can float, but it's tied to the assessed valuation, and the assessed valuation of all the property in Concord is quite high. So if you actually do the math on that, the technical limit for debt in the town is almost close to 400 million. So it's well beyond what we're talking about here. So there's no financial policy in the town that prohibits us from doing excluded debt. Excluded debt is excluded. And so it's up to the tax base and their willingness to take it on and to pay for it and to vote for it. And that's how it's sort of dealt with. Excluded debt tends to be the large projects. So the things that are greater than, let's say, $1 million tend to fall into the excluded debt category. So we have most recently started a new process around long-term capital planning. And those projects that are greater than $5 million are now, in fact, we've just started it, are now the subject of a series of meetings and public forums between the select board, the school committee, and the finance committee. So there is a process where we'll be looking at what are the projects that are coming up. And from the FinCom's perspective, one of the things that we're very focused on in that capital planning process is the timing. So as you saw back on that chart, the timing of debt is very important. To the extent that you can space it out, it is much easier to level load the impact on the tax bill. To the extent that you are not you're not planning it out, you're going to have spikes. And we have one. So the timing is important. So I think that process that we put in place should be very helpful in better managing the timing of the debt that's added to the town. Smaller debt, or smaller capital projects, I should say. So within the town's budget, there's tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. So tier 3 is the stuff that's $5 million or greater. Tier 2, I think sort of tends to be in between there, maybe $1 million to $5 million. And then underneath that is tier 1. Tier 1 is mostly maintenance type projects. So it's the very important work that gets done on the buildings around town, as well as roads and so forth. So there's there are financial policies around that. So typically tier 1 and tier 2, from an operating budget perspective, the town likes to say somewhere between 5 and 8% between those in total for those categories. So I think that is going to be something that we'll be looking at. We've always sort of had it around that level. I think there are some questions as to whether some of that might need to increase. There are some needs that are being identified through the Department of Public Works that make it look like some of that may need to push on that. So we have a long-term capital planning process for tier 3, so 5 million or greater. The only other projects that are on that, besides the middle school, which is the single largest one by far, there's a salt shed project that's been put on there. And there's also a public safety building, so a new building that would combine, fire and police headquarters. And that building is something that's been identified. It hasn't been priced, it hasn't been timed, but it is on the list. And if you attend or you go back and look at these capital planning forums, you'll hear a discussion of those. But for the moment, the school is the biggest item that we have to absorb. So I hope that helps with that. And I think, yes, that's the end of my slides.
Thank you, Chris. You did that in 22 minutes. Impressive. Let's see if you could not share any longer and
Yes.
we can get up. There are 2 ways now to go forward. One is to have you raise your hand by using under the reactions symbol on your computers or your iPads. Raise your hand so that we can call on you, or to write your questions into the chat box, and Carlin Reed is managing the chat box. So I'm going to start with Carlin for a minute. Carlin, is there a question that you would like to help us begin our conversation?
Sure, this is Carlin Reed. We have a bunch of questions already posed up in 4 different areas. One is a design question, and the other 3 are basically money questions. So I'd like to start with the design question first and then switch over to the dollar amount ones. The design question is a topic called biophilia, which is something that a term that Dawn had raised during one of the recent middle school building committee meetings. And she said that biophilia is important to the design of the middle school. So that was the first question that I'm going to suggest Dawn and anybody else can jump in. What's biophilia and how is it important to the middle school building design? Thank you.
I guess I will start since I brought it up was that just yesterday? And then I'm sure Matt has a few ideas that he can contribute as, a designer. Carlin, I want to just point out, turn around and look at what's behind you. Plants, nature, natural materials, connection to outdoors. These are all really important design features that aren't always appreciated until they're pointed out, right? If you look around, you see a lot of warm materials, you see a lot of natural materials, there are woods, there are, in some cases, there are green walls, there are things that tie building occupants to nature, which inherently allows them to feel comfortable, to feel tied to nature. You have natural light, and that inherently contributes to a happier place to learn a more desirable place to occupy. And this isn't just in schools, it's really important in schools because these students are at an age where they need to feel comfortable in a building. Imagine the most sterile office building you've ever walked into. I can describe that as non-biophilic. And as I think Heather has made a really, really good point in a lot of our materials discussions about having this feel connected to Concord, connected to the natural landscape in which it's being designed within. The treetops is actually the design that moved forward. And that was the architect's sort of labeling of things. But literally this building is sitting amongst, because you have the ravine, it's amongst the treetops. So biophilia is a term, it's not new, but it's definitely something that contributes to a healthier, more pleasant environment to live, occupy, and work and learn. Most importantly, these students need to feel comfortable.
And I think I will add on that everyone can probably intuit that makes sense, right? When you say that, everyone can say, yes, we feel better when we are outside in nature, when we can see nature. But at the Harvard School of Health, the Chan School, they've actually done some studies on this, and there's actually measurable improvements to human cognition when levels of biophilia are introduced into the built environment. And what's amazing is that it actually works on a sliding scale. And so if you have connection to actual nature, like real trees outside, that has the most positive impact. But you can actually get really positive impact as well from everything from pictures of plants to curvilinear forms that recreate sort of the conditions that you find in nature. All these things have both sort of, again, intuitive, but also really a measured benefit on everyone, students included.
Thank you, Matt. Does that answer your question, Carlin?
I think
There's so much more, but I want to get to the others. So
we have more questions too. Diane, how do you want to proceed with the next one? Or
Go ahead to the next one, please, and
Okay,
then
all right.
we'll see about raised hands. And but mostly, I think the chat box is going to be a big help. Thank you.
okay, sure. A really cool couple of questions dealing with trade-offs. Now, one question that was asked was what are the major value management issues? How were they resolved? And another really good question from Ellen: what are some of the examples of the compromises that were made to meet the target budget, and how did the team use the education vision to assure that the end product was the best for the town? Okay, trade-offs. Who wants to take that one?
Laura, you've got to.
I was gonna, yeah.
You got to start with that one.
Probably the one that comes to mind first, because it was an ongoing discussion for quite a while, would be the makerspace. A makerspace is an environment in a building that kids go to for hands-on learning activities, cooperative learning, authentic learning, project-based learning of all kinds, with a lot of resources already built into the space, and really almost an innovation lab to some extent. I could probably sort of equate the STEAM lab here at Ripley with that, and some of you know that project from a few years ago. We had hoped for a designated space that we could call a makerspace. And, through the ongoing work, that would definitely be a fit to the ed plan and a match. And through the ongoing work and the space challenges that I referenced earlier, I think we really collaboratively worked together to look at how other parts of the building could serve that same opportunity, even if we didn't have a designated space. So the design team is well aware that I am hopeful, and I know they're going to make this happen, that the library will have some opportunities for those kinds of activities, and that the team commons, which each grade level has 3 teams to it, and each team has 4 classrooms and a common space in the middle. We're really going to be looking for those team common spaces to be another version of a maker space. So that was a hard one. That was a hard one from the educational side. But I think we landed in a place where we didn't compromise the vision, but did compromise the space. So thanks for asking for an example.
That's a terrific.
And I just would like to say that throughout this process, I think that we pushed really hard on Lori when she would come up with a compromise. And it was very important to me that we made sure those compromises weren't going to compromise too much the plan or the vision. And there was a lot of really creative thinking when the gym became bigger to meet the needs of the community, and the alternative gym looked like it was not going to be part of the plan. Laura was able to look at the space with the architects and figure out how to take those functions and put them in other spaces in the building. So there was an awful lot of that going on. And I just want to make sure we note that.
Thank you so much. David Allen has raised his hand. You have a question, David?
Thanks. Going back to Christine's discussion from the FinCom point of view, this is a two-part, if I could follow up. The first is very brief. Your graph, of course, is most illustrative. The hump that comes after the thing finally gets started. Most of the world, of course, thinks in terms of level payment mortgages. Something else is going on here. If you could make sense of why it is there a hump that falls off, educate us about these facts. Said if I could follow up after that. Thanks.
Terrific question. And Christine, I meant to say that was an exquisite presentation. I mean, thank you so much. I should have said that right afterwards. I was so impressed by how quickly that I concentrated on time rather than quality. And you're muted, Christine, so you want to unmute.
Story of my life. Okay. I'm going to share the screen again so I can answer that question. So bear with me here. Unfortunately, now I'm not finding the presentation, so let me bring it up. Okay. I'm going to go back to Zoom. Let's see here. Okay, now I'm not finding the little button to let me do it.
Up at the top of its computer, you can usually find share screen.
Yeah, I'm usually it's at the bottom of my page, but now it's not showing up. Huh. Well, I apologize, but all right, so I'll explain it. What's happening, David, is that there's a reduction in in the primarily the high school debt that happens in around FY29 and FY30. So until that happens, there's a pretty big hump. And so that's really, that's part of what happens. There isn't really any, you're adding 100 million in debt. You're adding 7 million, over 7 million a year in debt service. And there isn't really anything else coming down. And around, it's slightly coming down, but in 30, both the elementary schools and the high school debt really starts to decline. And so that's why there's more of a hump in 26, 27, and 28. I hope that answers you. I apologize, I can't figure out how to share again.
Oh, no, that tells the story. Thanks so much. If I could then go on to part B, as it were, for leveling that out for debt stabilization, so-called. All we're really doing is using monies we paid before to make it possible for us to pay less now. But just to clarify, presumably the source of debt stabilization is so-called free cash, what would be retained earnings in a for-profit enterprise. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And that is, once again, to confirm that this is money that we paid in previously in taxes, which we're now bringing forward to make it easier on us at this point, but we've already paid it, in fact.
That's
But,
correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. I see Robert Hilsinger has raised his hand. Robert?
Pardon me, this is a question for Matt and for Dawn. Looking ahead, after the building is completed, I just feel that maybe the town hasn't set aside or hasn't had in mind what it takes to maintain a building. I think in the years down the road, the functional aspects of the building as it's completed will design as educational desires and needs increase. But we still need to maintain the building. And I just wondered if they might talk about what we might keep in mind as a percentage of the improvements to maintain this thing over some, 50-year period. Thank you.
John, do you want to start? Do you want me to go?
I was just going to ask Lori what she currently carries to maintain the two buildings that she has. And use that as a benchmark.
Yeah, we're always actively looking to maintain the schools that we have. Right now, we've got a capital plan for 5 years that works within the $900,000 town manager allocation to us annually. Over the course of that, we're always looking at the schools. So the energy replacement units, energy ERU, what's the R, Dawn or Matt? One of you. Recovery, thank you, unit. That we're replacing those at Alcott last summer, at Thoreau this coming summer. We're replacing some floor tile at Alcott. Rugs are on the list for Willard. Right now for Peabody and Sanborn, we hold in that 900,000, 100,000 for whatever happens, which we're never sure what's going to come next in those two schools right now. So that'll actually be something we cannot have to plan for. The high school is new enough that we're really we're monitoring all the time and doing proactive, but right now it's fairly low cost items that fit within the operating budget. So we're actually looking at a 5-year plan there that right now doesn't include anything significant other than the one roadway that never got paved initially. So it is a commitment of ours. And I think the capacity and skill set of the facilities team that I work with has been very adept at planning that forward. And we'll certainly be bringing the new middle school into that plan. So that's how we strategize it. And I'm not sure if you can answer the question about percentages or down the road, what it could be.
I don't know if from an operating standpoint, what the percentage on the cost of a building just off the cuff would be. I can tell you that, to Lori's point about a long range plan, it's like when you buy a brand new house. The first year, pretty much everything's under warranty, right? Something breaks, something needs to be fixed. The contractor's going to come back and make sure it's working properly. Some of the bills will be higher. I've told Lori this many times. The electric bill will be higher. Everything's working. Everything's commissioned. A lot of things are automated these days. Light switches, lots of things in the building are just automatic in the BMS, the building management system. So things work. And so bills will be higher, but maintenance should just be for the first handful of years. And if you plan it out, and it sounds like Lori's team does a really good job at this 5-10-year plan, then you can expect replacement costs in that time. Now we do life cycle cost analysis, LCCAs, if anyone's following along in our process. And that has to do with upfront payment versus what it will cost long-term to run and pay for services in the building. And there's a lot to that. It's much deeper than a few-minute answer. But I don't think I've quite answered your question because you asked about the percentage. And I think it really depends on the systems in the building, the occupant behavior, which is, is someone going to shut off the lights when they leave the room versus leave them on for the system to detect that no one's in there and then shut them off. So there's a lot of occupant behavior that happens within a building. And so that contributes to bills as well as maintenance. But a lot of the lights are LEDs. They're very high, they don't have to be replaced for a long time. So there's a lot of new things in modern buildings that require less maintenance. Do you have anything on top of that, Matt?
Well, I think I would also just echo the refrain from the prior discussion that we're taking 2 middle school buildings and we're consolidating to 1. So there's a tremendous amount of efficiency you get there on the operational side of things. I mean, the square footage of the building envelope that's represented between those 2 buildings alone that requires maintenance is going to be tremendously reduced. And so I think exactly what Dawn has said in terms of the building is going to be new to start off with. And as Laura was saying, Concord Carlisle Regional High School has less issues up front. So there's going to be a period where the maintenance costs are going to be much lower for the new building when it opens. But then long term as well, thinking about how this building is being designed, having an all electric type of mechanical system. I mean, it's impossible to understand or predict where fuel costs and energy costs are going to lie. But I think the trends we see right now are that fossil fuels, natural gas, oil, in terms of ways of heating and powering the building are getting more expensive in addition to the detrimental climate impact that those have. So focusing on the electrical source of to heat and again power the building should really allow for lower operational costs long term.
Thank
Could
you,
you
Robert.
speak to the, just to follow up on that, could you speak to the life of the building?
I'm sorry, Christine, in what regard?
How long is it going to last?
So it's generally intended to last 50 years is what our design outlook is for new public school construction.
So just to respond to the fellow's question, if you think about it from perhaps the way corporate would think about it, if it's $100 million building over 50 years, that's how we think about depreciation, right? Which is not necessarily maintenance costs, but that's what you're essentially absorbing as the building ages. It's 50 years into the 100 million.
Diane, I have a couple of questions about the tax impact, but you tell me what
Absolutely,
you want to
Carlin.
do.
First, I want to see, Robert, does that address your question? I mean, do you feel that you, yes, terrific. I also just want to acknowledge that we have the privilege of having Dean Banfield here this morning, who's been very much involved in the school building operations and paying a lot of attention to that. So Dean, welcome. And, any comments you would like to add at any point, please.
No, I think Chris is taking care of us very well. I'm the observer to the school building committee from the finance committee, so I'm observing here as well.
Thank you. I know you've been very busy doing that, so I wanted to acknowledge that. Okay, Carlin.
All right, let's take a couple questions that focus on the impact to the median tax bill. One question we have is, what would be the impact on the median tax bill if we extended the debt term from 20 years to 25 or 30? That's the first one.
Okay, so to 25 years, it's about $100 less. To 30 years, it's about $200 less to the median tax bill. The extension of the time frame has an impact of, so if you think about it in terms of the total cost of the taxpayer over the period that they pay that marginal amount. So if it's 20 years, the cost of the taxpayer at the median is $20,480. If it's 25 years, the cost to the median tax bill over that period of time is $22,850. And if you extend it to 30 years, it's $25,080. So there's a cost to it. So yes, it is helpful in terms of lowering the impact in the peak years, but because you're borrowing money for a longer period of time, it adds to the overall cost of the project. So the interest increment that you would pay between 20 and 30 years is $22 million.
Okay, and that assumes that the same person who's paying the bill 20 years from now is the same person who's also in town at 25 and 30. So
Right,
it's
correct,
who pays
right,
the bill,
right,
but-
which obviously they
Exactly.
probably won't be, but that's the way to think about it, yes.
Okay, the other question, and it's a little technical from the financial parts, so if Stefan Bader is available, please make sure I'm asking this question correctly. Have we considered or have the advisors recommended floating rate debt to reach a lower effective rate? And I'm not sure I quite understand all the terms, so if you
Yeah.
can help that, I'd appreciate that.
I'm not an expert on municipal financing, Stefan, so, but I'm pretty sure you can do that in the early part of the borrowing, but when we go to float debt, we're going to ask for a fixed term, most likely, so a fixed rate. So I'm not an advisor. I know that FinCom sent a letter to the select board to talk about mentioning these very issues of what could happen with term. Is it possible to put in a call option where you could perhaps fix the rate for, or fix the amount for 5 years during the peak period and then refinance once the peak period is over? So those are discussions that the finance director and the select board would need to have with the advisor as to whether there's a way to customize the debt offering. But they'd have to operate within municipal law. So the state has rules about how municipalities float debt. So, and I'm not, I really can't speak to that. So I think that's a question best addressed to the finance director.
Thank you.
Laurie?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that, because of the regional piece to the high school, we manage that debt here. We just refinanced the high school and saved $3 million on the overall bills. So it's never a one and done and you don't keep looking at it. And if you're borrowing with quality folks and advisors around you, they help cue you when the time is right to consider those options. So we've been very well supported in trying to do the best possible fiscal management of the high school debt. So I'm sure the town will do the same with this.
I thought maybe refinancing was an option. Hooray.
It certainly is. It certainly is.
Okay. Carlin, are there other questions in the chat box?
Those are the major ones that I think have been asked and answered at this point. I'm happy to get other questions and I can come up with a couple of ones off the wall if you really need it, but I know I
think we're actually, our timing could not be more perfect. It's 11:01 and this is meant to go until 11 o'clock. One of the things I just want to do is to Heather, if you could once again, just remind us about the dates that are ahead of time for people who perhaps were not here in the middle of the meeting.
Absolutely. And thank you, because you give me a chance to redeem myself, because I didn't have the dates in front of me for next week and I wasn't sure of the day of the Council on Aging coffee. So I'll go through it again. So next week, we are going to be at the Council on Aging Tuesday morning at 11:30. That's in person. I think there's a discussion group there at 10. And so if anybody is there at the discussion group, they can stay. Anybody else can show up. It's at the Harvey Wheeler Building Tuesday at 11:30. Then Wednesday evening is the panel discussion on sustainability, which will be at the Peabody Building of the middle school at 7 p.m. In person with masks. Then we will have continued coffees over the next few weeks, more coffees and opportunities to just come and learn and find out and discuss and ask questions. And then the big dates, of course, are the special town meeting, January 20th at the high school in the evening. It will be a 1-question special town meeting. We need a 2/3, or the town would need a 2/3 vote in order to move forward with the excluded debt, and then would also need to pass at the ballots, which is February 3rd. That needs just a majority. So the two big days are January 20th, special town meeting, and February 3rd for the ballot election.
And of course, the public hearing.
And the public hearing, thank you, sorry, is December 16th
Yeah.
in the evening, which is, like you said, both virtual and in person at the townhouse. So 2 ways to attend that one.
I know the league is so grateful for the expertise and the time that each of these committees has spent And in fact, there are at least 4 committees, I believe, Heather, that have been working in various ways on this middle school endeavor. And FinCom is obviously always working very hard on our behalf. And I just want to thank all of those people, because it makes a big difference to live in a town where these undertakings are entered into seriously and collaboratively. So there's a sense that everyone is involved in the discussion. If you continue to have questions of any kind, I know you can reach out to Laurie, you can reach out to Heather, you can reach out to Christine. I'm sure they're all 3 would be more than happy to answer your questions. I also just want to say that there have been some wonderful notes in the chat box thanking the building committee for integrating nature into that space and protecting the trees around it as a gesture. And each one is an important gesture to climate, to avoiding climate calamity. And so thank you on behalf of the person in the chat box who made this comment. Thank you all for joining our first Friday. We will have another one in January on a different topic. I think it's going to be on helping us to understand the election process. Where do you vote? On what street do you live? In what room will you be? Or to borrow the Hamilton language, in the room where it happened, where will that room be? So thank you all so much. Dawn, thank you. Pat, thank you.
Thanks for having us.
And our 2 experts, Matt and Ian, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you
Bye.
for having us.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you so
you.
much. Have a great day, everyone.